Did they know who you were at that point?
No, not at that point. No, they didn't have. So that's DNC. That's late summer 2016. Fast forward all the way to when I'm infiltrating Antifa's meeting at the prior to Trump's inauguration. So people always think that, oh, there was violence on January 6th, and so there wasn't a peaceful transfer of power, and this is the unprecedented attack on our democracy. Well, actually, the first, if you want to go on that route, the first attack on democracy was when Antifa and their affinity groups planned sophisticated attacks on Trump's inauguration on January 20th of 2017. They called it Disrupt J20 because it was their intention to go after Trump's inauguration and to change it essentially so that he could not physically be inaugurated that day because the security conflict that they wanted to incite. And so I was infiltrating their meetings in December of 2016 in the basement of St. Stephen's Church in Washington, D.C. And lo and behold, they've got this sign up that says, hey, we're going to attack this Trump supporter event, this ball that's being held the night before the inauguration on January 19th. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, that's when I'm holding my event, the DeploraBall. And then they start reading off the names of the people who are going to be speaking at the DeploraBall. And they go to, we're going to get Jack Posobiec. We're going to go after him, and we're going to go after Jim Hoft and James O'Keefe and everybody else who's going on to this thing. So we're in this meeting, in this sophisticated meeting, where they have a variety of affinity groups, where they have working groups of people that are going to be conducting certain levels of operations, people who are going to for different parts of the hierarchy of the Black Bloc. And so what people need to understand is, so not only was I on their radar at that point, but they still hadn't, I still wasn't quite known enough where they would know me by sight. And so I'm just sitting in the room with my, with my phone out recording, and they are talking about bringing in drones with bottle rockets and smoke grenades and everything they can do to just disrupt, cause mayhem, incendiary devices, attack people when they come off the National Mall because they know that the security cordon of the Capitol Police and Secret Service isn't going to be there. So, and a lot of these activities were actually carried out. Now, what's great though is that we were able to get the information about the attack specifically on my event on the DeploraBall. We were able to get that to law enforcement. We then got it to Project Veritas. Project Veritas brings a couple of these guys out, and they put them on a Project Veritas sting, essentially. And so O'Keefe is sitting there with it, or not him, but one of his guys is sitting there with a couple of these Antifa leaders saying, hey, so, what do you want to do to these guys? What do you want to do? They're talking about pouring sulfuric acid, which is essentially a smoke released, pelletized form of gas through the air vents that would then force us to have to shut down our events. They're planning an actual domestic terrorist attack on my inaugural ball, which we were holding at the National Press Club. That information, so that broke live. We put that out everywhere in the media. Finally, local police, DC police actually did come and at least arrested those three who were planning the inside attack on the DeploraBall. We of course got their names and we kicked them out to make sure they weren't able to come in, if the DC police let them out, because we know that's certainly they ended up getting like probation and community service, of course, because who cares about domestic terrorist attacks. But then as we were actually going up to the DeploraBall, I'd say about a crowd of 100 to 200 Antifa, black clad, burning fires, throwing stuff at our
I'm going to show you this.
Stuff at my family as they went in. I mean, hundreds, absolutely hundreds.
I'm going to show you this. I found a clip right before we started. Yeah. Here, this is the clip. Now
Okay.
Keep walking. Keep walking. Keep walking. Keep walking. This guy right here.
Back up! Back up!
Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up!
Get that man to safety.
There you go.
Listen,
Back up!
1033, get that man to safety. Get that man to safety.
We are, sir. We got
He's with me.
That's insane.
Yeah, and so you can't actually see my my parents and my fiance, my wife now, in that specific clip, but you can see people, you know, kind of dressed up in their evening wear coming in, and I got to tell you, it's not easy for me to watch that stuff, right? Because, you know, to some extent, I view that as, you know, we didn't realize that it was going to get that bad, and we called as many of the police as we could. And I mean, you can see the you know, police are out there. You can see we've got a ton of protection from MPD, but it's not enough. And those are our guests that are being harassed. That's our people that's being that's being assaulted. You can see Lacey McCauley, who's the former leader of DC Antifa, right there. That's that girl with the sort of the frizzy reddish hair who comes up. And you know, we're looking back on it, and look, you know, once everybody got inside, you know, we actually had a great time. It was a wonderful event, but I still look back at that thing, and it's one of those ones that I always think, you know, if we had just done, you know, what could we have done differently so that I wouldn't have had to put our people through that?
What do you think you could have done differently?
So what we ended up learning from that experience was that because we had become targeted by Antifa, what we then began doing was instituting deception operations using what we call denial and deception tactics to put out basically false information about where our events would be held and where the locations would be. So the next couple of times that we held events in the DC area, specifically the DC area, also in New York, we would put out fake press releases with the name of, you know, some venue that either didn't exist or one that was, you know, over in Maryland, but we're in, you know, like the National Harbor area, but we're actually in Washington, D.C. for the event. And then so we would make sure that the fake press release goes out wide throughout Twitter so that Antifa sees it and then travels to that far off location. Whereas our guests then are able to get into the event because we're all sending them an encrypted communication with the real address. So employing these types of OPSEC measures, using encrypted communications to be able to get the true information out there. I think after we did that a couple times, Antifa started catching on, and they would be able to figure it out. But by that point, you know, our guests had already gotten inside. So, you know, even though we did learn to adapt and evolve and overcome these challenges, at the same time, you know, looking back, I just really wish it hadn't happened.
So how would Antifa's tactics have been different? Because you said that you would have kind of improved the way you do your own reconnaissance and the way you kind of manage your communications. If that same event was happening today, how would Antifa have not only changed their reconnaissance, but in terms of the visuals, which is a very important part of their attack, right, is the visual so they can get the media to kind of replay it. How would that same attack look different today? What different tactics would they have employed?
Well, today you would certainly see more tactics of, so they picked up the umbrellas from the Hong Kong protesters. And so they employed the use of umbrellas quite a bit more that you're seeing from, and that day back then you don't really see anything other than a couple of placards that are made typically by Refuse Fashion. This is a group that's supported by the Alliance for Global Justice that receives a ton of money in foundational money from a lot of left-wing causes and from names that I'm sure everybody would know. We get into that in the book. But also you would see tactics more of along the lines of those the umbrellas, and the umbrellas that are then used for assault. They're also used to blot out cameras for any media they would consider non-friendly to them. You would see 2x4s employed, so they'll attach a black flag to it or a red flag to a 2x4, which they can then use to say, oh, well, look, you know, I'm just carrying a flag. This is nothing to do with
is that because I'm so interested in this. I interrupt a lot. I should have warned you. I should have warned you before we start. I interrupt a lot, right?
Oh, I've talked to you before, Adam. I know what it's like.
I can't help myself. I'm like a little kid. So do you think that they're more willing to use violence now because that they know, because there really wasn't a lot of confrontations like the type that you had much later, like the type that you had last year in your DC encounter with them, right?
Yeah, and you have to understand too. There's different, as Michael Malice says, the black flag comes in many colors, and I think there's a difference between a DC Antifa, sort of the East Coast Antifa, versus the West Coast Antifa. So DC Antifa is they'll come to your house, they'll threaten you, they'll do things like this, they'll dox you, they'll get you fired from your job. They will come after your school. If you're in school, they'll try to, if you're a member of any organization, they'll try to get you kicked out. They'll run to their buddies in media, the fellow travelers in, whether it be former establishment media like NBC, or in the legacy media, or these sort of quote unquote, disinformation / counter extremism reporters, which, have made an entire industry out of defaming people and aiding Antifa and their tactics. But then West Coast Antifa tends to typically be far more violent. It's in West Coast Antifa that you have the story of Michael Forrest Reinhold, who kills a Trump supporter in cold blood during one of these skirmishes. The thing has ended, and of course the CCTV closed circuit footage has come out of this where he's lying in wait in a garage, then comes forward and just shoots this guy, blows him away. And it's amazing to me that not only, of course, does Vice News give this guy a sit-down interview, but for so many people out there, they just completely overlook that any of these things happened throughout.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. I got another question for you. You ready for this? So yeah. That guy, right, who killed somebody. Now, I first started becoming very aware of Antifa from Paul Gottfried, right, because he saw it kind of its historical context as you did, and he said, "Hey, I see it coming over here, and I'm very worried about them." And then I saw it from you with DeploraBall, and I was like, this is not a regular type of thing. This is a very orchestrated type of thing. But then I also saw CNN, Mitt Romney, right, kind of recruiting what appears to me, having come out of the HR industry, very aggressively recruiting for Antifa by using the imagery of like D-Day and guys coming off the thing, and these are the heroes.
Do you mean Chris Cuomo?
Was it Chris? They're all the same to me.
Yeah, they are kind of all the same. Yeah, that was Chris Cuomo who said, this was Antifa at D-Day, right? Where they're caught up in the nomenclature of, well, Antifa just means anti-fascist. So if you're against fascism, they're completely surface level word thinking with any of this. Where had they lived through any moment of the Cold War or understood any of the Cold War, they would know that the phrase anti-fascism was used by East Germany as a sort of state religion. In fact, the Berlin Wall's official title in East Germany was not the Berlin Wall. Do you know what they called it?
No, I don't.
They called it the Anti-Fascist Protection Rampart. So they actually called it the Antifa Wall in East Germany. That's how the East German communists referred to the Berlin Wall, because again, this is a definitional situation where in their definitional, you would call it semantics, but no, it's their doctrine. It's their doctrine that fascism extends to what Stalin called in the 1930s, social fascism, right? So this is the state, this is the government, this is banking institutions, financial institutions, this is small businesses, this is why they commit destruction of property, violence against property, this is churches, this is community organizations, anyone or anything that props up what you might consider the status quo becomes fascism in their eyes. And of course, then they are justified in using any sort of violence whatsoever against it, because of course, violence against fascism is revolution for the people. You see this all the way back in 1901 when Leon Czolgosz and an anarcho-socialist sort of former worker is going to these anarchist speeches with Emma Goldman and other people, and he hears you have to rise up against the rulers, you have to kill the rulers, you have to kill the masters. And he says, okay, fine, I'm going to go do that. So he puts on this huge trench coat, goes into the Pan American exhibition in Buffalo with a revolver, walks up to President William McKinley and shoots him and kills him right in his chest.
So when Chris Cuomo was saying this, do you think that he has that awareness? I mean, he's not by any means.
I don't think so. I don't think Chris Cuomo has any awareness whatsoever. I mean, if you look at how he's conducted himself, certainly over the past year.
But do you feel that his not having an awareness was required some effort for him? Because he's not stupid. So if he had any type of inquisitiveness about Antifa, it's not difficult for him with a staff of hundreds to be able to find out everything about Antifa. So do you think it's possible that he does know who Antifa is, and he kind of knew the danger of the organization and just kind of facilitated that role of a propagandist for?
Well, so what Cuomo does is actually far more insidious than what you're suggesting here. He actually goes so far as to actually conduct the due diligence. This is in the aftermath of Charlottesville, understands who Antifa is, reads about them, understands what they stand for, understands that they want the destruction of our country, our way of life, the removal of it. They are a true insurgency, a domestic insurgency within the United States. But then he goes to the next level and he says, well, this is the classic line, not all punches are equal. So he tries to impose a moral framework on this by in which violence is justified morally because their cause is far more righteous than the people that they are being violent against, right? And so this moral formulation that Chris Cuomo puts forward, and it's a little inept in the way he says it, but not all punches are equal. What he's saying is that violence is justified when it's conducted against conservatives, when it's conducted against Trump supporters, when it's conducted against the enemies of those that CNN would deem, well, for lack of a better word, deplorable. And so what he's doing then is he's justifying the use of political violence for political ends. And when that happens in the United States or in any country, any polity, you then get it just as Newton taught us, right? For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So when violence is being justified, there will be a reaction. And that is exactly why myself and so many people, even before Charlottesville, months before then, held an event actually outside of the White House in June of 2017. We still called it the anti-violence rally and said, we need to not go down this road, right? Let's use words, let's use the ballot box, let's use anything possible to us, but not cross that line of political violence. Because once you open that lid, right, there are dangerous and evolving pathogens that come out of it, and that is not a place where anybody wants to go as a country.
So do you think that, so that person that killed somebody, right? They killed somebody in Seattle, I guess. They kind of crept up behind him.
It's Portland.
Okay. How do you know anything like, so was he kind of a recent recruit, or how long had he kind of been associated? I don't know kind of the organizational structure, but how long had he been associated with that like little wing of it? And since
Michael Forrest Reinhold had actually been a pretty longstanding member of Rose City Antifa. That's the name of the sort of regional cell out there of Antifa. And so he was kind of a known quantity. I'd have to go into my research to find exactly how long it's been, but he's been someone who had already had charges against him for unlawful possession of a firearm. He's someone who had been sort of a kind of a drifter, like sort of a life drifter, if you put it that way. You know, he had a kid here or there. He would move from job to job. He wanted to be a competitive snowboarder at one point. Never really found his niche in life. You know, he would go around claiming that he was an Army veteran, yet the Army had no record of this whatsoever. And so, you know, I believe it's actually his sister who in a comment to I want to say Daily Mail, it was either Daily Mail or New York Post, after the death, she said, "Oh, it doesn't surprise me that." So when I say the death, that's because he fled. He fled to a safe house across the line in Washington with some Antifa allies of his, where he thought that he could hide out. Then U.S. Marshals, because a warrant was placed out for his arrest for murder from the state of Oregon, but because he's crossed state lines, that now makes it federal. So U.S. Marshals go after him with a task force of their own. They lie in wait for him. They attempt to take him down peacefully. He draws a gun on them. And so he's killed in a hail of bullets there in the street in Washington, outside of Olympia, in an sort of an apartment complex there in the parking lot. They tried to get him when he was going towards his car. And so his sister, in a reaction to this, reportedly from one of these tabloids, says, "Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, and I'm not surprised to learn he's dead."
Was she sympathetic as well to the Antifa type of cause?
To me, it sounded more. To me, her comment didn't necessarily sound sympathetic towards anyone's politics, but just that it sounded to me more like she had lost her relationship with her brother many years past, and knew that sort of in an emotional, spiritual sense, had already been dead to her.
Well, so when CNN was doing all these, and I've got some of them, right? I downloaded a lot of them. I've been downloading these for probably like the last 3 years. I'm really interested in it. So I'll show you this one really briefly. You were referring to it. It's about Punch a Nazi. Remember that?
Yeah.
Crazy, right? I've got a whole bunch of them.
Right. So again, what you're hearing in that chant is a call for political violence. And keep in mind that these are organizations that define anyone, to the left of the Cuomo family as a Nazi, right? So you could be someone who's a college Republican, a member of TPUSA, an NRA supporter, someone who's just happened to vote for Trump, and maybe you got a MAGA hat or you put a bumper sticker on. Well, this group definitionally has decided that you are now a Nazi, and therefore the moral formulation that they're espousing in these words is that violence against you is not only justified but encouraged.
And how do they select their targets? So does Rose City, which I think you said was kind of the more violent, the more explicit of the two, I suppose, or perhaps the more organized of them, versus the one in DC, do they go after the same targets, or how do they segment their targets differently?
Well, so there's a few there's a few examples of this, but some of it, a large majority of it, is opportunistic violence. So they've decided to march along a certain route, and so violence will be conducted there. Or it's a specific date for them. So May 1st, of course, is sort of an international communist day. So this is a day that you'll see a lot of Antifa violence, particularly in Europe. As a matter of fact, of course, Europe is where Antifa comes from, founded in 1932. Ernst Thälmann, a Soviet agent, was the original head of Antifa and the founder. And but you'll also see that when a conservative group is planning some sort of event, or sort of the ubiquitous one, of course, being a Trump rally, one of these events is taking place within the proximity of one of these affinity groups, one of these regional cells, they will then flex out and commit violence as a response to that event that's already taking place. So I think the most recent one was a memorial for Ashley Babbitt that was being held in Sacramento, so the capital of California, and Antifa violence broke out there at what had been up to that point a peaceful memorial.
And who's training them? I remember going back to when I first heard of them. I think maybe the third or fourth time I ever really heard of them being a real presence here was somebody on Facebook that I know who's kind of crazy, and he was part of a group that was being organized by ex-Democrat leaders, political activist leaders, who were teaching them how to employ violence. And that was, I guess that was right after Trump became president. They were being coached in how to manage violence and how, what to say with violence. So going back, so does Rose City and the one in DC, are they being organized differently? Are they being instructed differently? Or are these just organizations that are kind of very freewheeling and each of them will operate within its own kind of ecosystem of violence? I mean, is there any orchestration between them?
Yeah, I would say the orchestration that you see is typically towards groups that are close in proximity. So you'll see coordination. But for example, when I was in CHAZ in Seattle, which was largely conducted by the Emerald City Antifa, which is the Seattle-based chapter, as well as the John Brown Gun Club of Puget Sound. This is a member of the former Socialist Rifle Association, which is also tied to Redneck Revolt. And these are the more pro-gun wielding forms of Antifa. They joined together to form CHAZ to take over that 12 square block radius, including Cal Anderson Park in downtown Seattle. But because that's only about a 2.5 hour drive from Portland to Seattle, there then many members of Rose City Antifa actually traveled north, and we saw people that we were able to identify because they were known members, known quantities, and in some cases leaders from Portland Antifa who are now up in Seattle because they've been attracted to the CHAZ. You also saw a member, Daniel Allen Baker, who had come from Tallahassee, Florida. This is who came to CHAZ to participate with the John Brown Gun Club. He formerly had been a member of Antifa that traveled all the way to Syria. In the book that we were talking about, the chapter where members of Antifa are going over to Syria to receive training and battlefield experience from a U.S. designated terrorist group, the PKK, and their offshoot, the YPG, in northeast Syria. He goes up then, is in CHAZ, this guy Daniel Allen Baker from Florida, by way of Florida, saying, look, guys, we need to use more violence, more violent tactics, pipe bombs, explosions, IEDs. We need to fortify this thing and expand CHAZ to spark a true revolution. He's trying to use these battlefield tactics that he's learned from essentially the creation of a local autonomous zone in northeast Syria to apply that to Seattle, right? These are the same type of tactics we saw with the Red Army faction of Germany training with the PLO back in the 1960s and 1970s. And of course, they had KGB funding back then, but now this is largely being done by Antifa and by their financial supporters today. You also saw, in terms of that travel, that Minneapolis and the death of George Floyd, the Derek Chauvin trial, all of the violence that was sparked after that. So Minneapolis became a center where people would actually be traveling to from Portland, from Seattle. They'd be road tripping, in some cases flying to get across the country, bringing their tactics, bringing their best practices. And you can see that in some of these cases where people are being arrested in and around Minneapolis that are coming in from out of state and from places that have these hardened cells of Antifa already, regionally speaking. So, it's kind of to go back to what, sort of the famous, right, Joe Biden phrase, right? Antifa, they're just an idea, right? Well, sure, they're an ideology, but so is radical Islam, right? And radical Islam then sparks a movement which creates networks and then creates regional and local cells that are able to conduct domestic terrorist action, direct action, operations, violent operations. So yes, these are extremist ideologies. That's absolutely correct. Our issue is, what are they doing when they act upon them?
Yeah, so I want to get to some questions because there's such really interesting questions here. I've got a lot of questions, but a lot of these questions are kind of better than mine. It's really interesting. And I want to thank GQ and then a whole bunch of numbers who asked GQ 102, whatever, 58827. Thank you so much for joining us. Why didn't Trump investigate Antifa and protect his supporters? And I want to add to that question. Do you think that Trump, because Antifa became so strong while he was in office, was he also very aware of what was going on to the violence to his supporters?
So, Trump's very aware of Antifa. And, you get that from chapter 1 of the book, is specifically about this question of him imploring the FBI, and Robert O'Brien, his national security advisor, was actually completely on Trump's side when it came to this organization and using the assets of the national security apparatus to go after them. But it really was Chris Wray and to an extent Bill Barr coming in. And so Trump tells Wray to go do this. Trump gets fed up with Wray because he won't. Ray then stonewalls a number of other directives from Trump. And so Trump gets fed up with him, starts to want to fire Chris Wray. Bill Barr hears about this and says, if you fire Wray, I will resign. Right. And so Barr, and Wray, they're both there institutionalists. They're people who believe in the system. They want to get back to that time when, the FBI and DOJ speak with one voice. That's what they're going for. And so Trump is met with a lot of resistance to this, the same way that he was met with resistance when he called for thousands of National Guard troops to be deployed on the morning of January 6, 2021 at the United States Capitol, because he did not want violence breaking out that day. He was denied that by the Department of Defense. He was denied that by the chain of command. He was denied that operationally. The mayor of the city was screeching at the top of her lungs not to allow any more federal intervention on January 6th. The tweet is still up from January 5th, which anyone can go see. I can't imagine that she still has it up, but she does actually. And so you see this time and again, and it is kind of like a broken record talking about the Trump administration, where he is calling for these things to happen, and the bureaucracy and sort of the yes minister, Sir Humphrey Appleby, if anyone's seen that show, is thwarting him at every turn.
Why do you think they were doing that?
Well, I think they're doing that for a number of reasons, but essentially it is that the administrative state in the United States has taken on a life of its own and is wielding sovereignty that it was never intended to on its own. And you see this sovereignty being given to them through the abrogation of power by Congress, the abrogation of power by a succession of presidents before Trump, who were sort of, fine to just quote unquote let the experts take care of it. This is, of course, done in conjunction with a variety of shadowy NGOs and their dark money networks. Many of those NGOs, which also get same funding from the same sources that eventually that provide sort of feed capital for Antifa, and professors and universities, these academic centers, which are also receiving financial support from the federal government. Not only are they breeding grounds for these completely anti-American and extreme ideologies like critical race theory, but they become breeding grounds for Antifa. Well, you also see a crossover effect between the universities, their faculty, and the administrative state of the U.S. government. So this is the massive problem that has been created. It's not one, if you look at the government, how it's supposed to be functioning on paper from the Constitution in 1791 when that comes out. No, this really goes back to the German system, which was designed in the late 1800s. Then Woodrow Wilson really expands it and attempts to expand it in the United States. If go back to read Wilsonian writings about the administrative state. I know this is a long answer, but I'm trying to be correct here. This is the Wilsonian administrative state that over 100 years ago, he called for putting this in. He was quite explicit about it. If you actually go read some of the things that he put together while he was at Princeton, that this is exactly what he wanted to do. And he wanted to create a system whereby the state would be an organic entity unto itself, and that these pesky politicians and representatives would be mere window dressing for it. So, to use the term deep state is kind of like a social media parlance because it's easy, right? And social media is short, but it actually is the administrative state, which has been separated by, I guess you could say it's almost like air gapping in technology. It's air gapped from the representatives, which also means that it's air gapped from the people.
So I noticed with CNN that more people were becoming very sympathetic, and in fact were kind of identifying their allegiances almost. There were regular people, right? Regular people who were becoming very sympathetic to the language, to the visuals of Antifa, to giving it some type of a moral authority, and to thinking that they were somehow a part of Antifa, like emotionally they were connected to Antifa, regular people. So my friends who were watching,
what you're talking about is parasocial relationships. So parasocial relationships are a phenomenon that comes up through, in many cases, television. People believe they have personal feelings or identification with various characters. You can see this in the online standing communities where people will say they want certain characters to form a relationship on a TV series or movie series. Now we see, and then you get very upset when that doesn't happen, right? They actually have personal emotional responses when the outcomes that they are looking for in a relational, emotional sense are not happening for fictional characters on TV shows. Well, you're seeing that same kind of dichotomy and that dynamic play out when it comes to Antifa, because we've taken politics and turned it into team sports in the United States. And so when Antifa is out there fighting, quote unquote, the bad guys, right, then you get a sort of vicarious kind of contact high just from knowing that it's happening, watching the videos, getting the dopamine rush because your team is winning, quote unquote, when Antifa is out there taking it to the vast evil henchmen of Donald Trump. I mean, these people actually think in many cases that they're fighting against the American Reich and Russian spies and secret soldiers of the, whatever organization that's crept in from 4chan and other places, as opposed to realizing that these are just fellow Americans. And you see this type of demonization, out-group versus in-group kind of tribalization going on, and it's exacerbated in many cases by mainstream media, by cable news. This is our group, and we attack the other group. This is our group, and those guys are not like us, so we're going to mock them, we're going to ridicule them. And this is something that actually Bill Maher has talked about, that he's said that he doesn't want to mock Trump supporters as much anymore, and he's going to try not to do that, because he says, look, if I have a problem with something Trump says, I'll talk about him directly. But he realized that the otherization, the demonization of the other, is something that when it happens, it can create very, very poor social cohesion. And when we're in times of economic distress, as we are now, times of austerity, times of scarcity, that the tribes get smaller, the cohesion breaks down. And so people are you're actively looking now from, these are very primal instincts that people have. They're looking to throw people out of the group. And so the group you identify with becomes smaller and smaller. It's not like, I remember growing up in late 80s, early 90s, the good guys were the United States and the bad guys were the Soviet Union. And that was very clear. And if you had an American flag, you were one of the good guys, and that was it. There were no divisions in society among that. Republican, Democrat, well, that was just somebody you voted for once every 4 years. It wasn't like your entire identity is wrapped up in politics. That all has changed. And I guess there's an interesting, larger psychological question over whether or not that happens more during times of economic austerity versus economic abundance. And, it's something that I'd love to look into more, because, my own childhood growing up in the 90s was certainly a time of economic abundance for the United States. Whereas we look at it now, it is much more a time of economic scarcity. And certainly, I'm sort of that elder millennial, centennial age bracket. And so the millennials as a generation have one of the worst financial economic outlooks of any generation in recent history. You're seeing, that really be sandwiched between the baby boomers and Gen X, who lived during times of great economic wealth, and now Zoomers are actually doing better financially. They're on a better financial track than millennials are. And so I wonder a lot how much of this is also happening because of those unique economic situations that millennials find themselves in, because in many cases, it is millennials that are actively involved in these groups like Antifa. They feel disenfranchised, they're angry, they're upset at the system. They don't feel that they can follow the quote unquote, proverbial American dream. And so they turn outside the system. They turn to groups like Antifa because they feel that they've been wronged, that they've been slighted, and that so they look for extreme forms to sort of get revenge for having not being able to achieve the life that they were promised.
It's interesting. I sent you, I messaged you a link about this. I know I messaged you one about one of Mao's speeches, but I think I might have also sent you this also about analysis that was done about why people were joining the Red Guard.
Right.
And part of the compelling reason was because they had all done as much studying as they could. Any more additional studying was not going to be the decisive factor in them getting admitted to the college, right? And because there was already getting to be a job scarcity, and it was no longer truly based on merits alone, but there was now kind of mature, and it was based upon, it was already in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, based upon who you kind of know. It was already getting to be very mature. That the only way that was politically allowed, the only way that was allowed for them to express themselves was through politics. And they weren't allowed to complain about anything else in society, right, except Mao wanted to continually turn them, what was called bombarding the house, continually having them assault the government.
Yeah, so what people, I think, to kind of explain the Chinese Cultural Revolution to people that are just, I understand that for most Americans, Chinese history, even Chinese modern history, just sounds like total chaos. And to an extent it is, right? It takes a long time to kind of piece it all together. But it's actually a revolution within a revolution. So they call it the Wenhua Dageming in Chinese. So it's the Great Cultural Revolution. But what it is the reason they call it the Cultural Revolution is twofold. One, because it is a revolt against ancient Chinese culture. I mean, they're digging up like former imperials to denounce them as right-wing extremists and imperialists in China. The people have been dead for, hundreds of years. And they are then targeting members of the party. So the reason that Mao unleashes this force of the Red Guards is because the Great Leap Forward has been a complete financial disaster. It's contributed to the deaths of tens of millions, possibly as many as 50 million people across China. These completely insane economic policies that he demanded and forced everyone in the country to adhere to, these massive, work farms and communes and everything. And it's a complete failure. A massive famine erupts for 3 years. And so Mao's power has diminished, and he understands, and he's probably correct in this sense, that there are people in the party that are now working against him, that are aligning against him to sort of shift him into more of a ceremonial role, and then they can kind of lead China back to some more sense of stability. Mao realizes this and decides to, and he's quite syphilitic at this point as well, by the way. Mao was notorious for sleeping with as many women as possible, underage women, underage girls. And so he's got syphilis at this point, and he dies in 1976. And so his mind is kind of addled by these viruses. And so he realizes that everyone's plotting against him, and he's not completely incorrect on this. So he goes back to the one thing that he knows how to do, sparking revolutions, and says, look, there are people within the party, there are people within the government that are trying to take us down. They're working with the Americans, they're working with the CIA, they're working with the Soviets. So the Sino-Soviet split has already happened at this point because Khrushchev doesn't want to give Mao the bomb. He doesn't want to give him the atomic bomb. And so this creates a split between the USSR and China. And so Mao is tightening his grip, and he goes to the children, he goes to the youth, he goes to those he knows can be most radicalized. And one tidbit, which I realized that I haven't spoken about as much at length, that we talk about in there, which everyone can read about, antifabook.com, is that Xi Jinping's own father was someone who was subject to one of these struggle sessions at one point, Xi Jinping, and he is then sent to the farmlands, to the rural lands. So he gets purged, but doesn't get killed because he already had been like a pretty high level party member. So they can't kill him. He's too well known. But because of the persecution of the Red Guards, of his family, of the targeting of them, of the targeting of their children, Xi Jinping's oldest sister actually commits suicide during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and suicides were rampant. As many as 10 million people in total were killed just during the Cultural Revolution, and so many of those were people who didn't want to be subjected to that type of social persecution, that harassment. They decided to kill themselves rather than face those struggle sessions. So you see teachers jumping off of buildings, mothers and fathers killing themselves because their own children have been turned against them. And
they were denied medical care also.
Denied medical care, absolutely. And so in the case of Xi Jinping's eldest sister, her name is actually Xi Heping, that reportedly, and this is something where it's the Cultural Revolution, so it's very hard to get true information or to verify any of the information that's come out of it. But the report is that she hung herself on a shower curtain, actually in the family home. This is his oldest sister, because of the persecution of the Red Guards. And her father, by the way, had been one of the leading communists at the time, but it didn't matter because he was accused of being an anti-party extremist, and the entire force of the Red Guards was sent against them.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that, as you know, and it's interesting, and I see that already happening here. I see where they're creating kind of a caste system within the left itself, because the social revolution and Maoism was a very left movement, and it's something that you and I think have discussed offline. Is you and I both know what a progressive is, and it was always a progression towards kind of Mao's, crazy dreams. I see that being replayed here. So his family, as well as many of the elite families, it's a dynastic system over there. So a lot of them kind of disappeared in the 60s, came back. Their their children came back in the 80s, and now we're seeing she is part of that system. They would. They're
referred to, by the way, the new generation. So Xi Jinping's generation, they call them the princelings.
So what you were saying about how you wonder how much of what's happening here is because of kind of the lack of opportunities, and I was saying how that same thing happened in China. So in the 1960s, they have these 5-year plans, and it's going to get kind of boring stuff. But what happened in the early 1960s was they need, because the country had just come out of the Great Leap Forward and it was just a complete devastation. They didn't have a lot of human capital. They didn't have a lot of engineers required to rebuild the country. So they just needed jobs. They just needed kids to just get careers. So from the 1960s to around 1966 was just kind of a very booming period. But towards the later years of that, they now had an abundance of those engineers. And what was happening in China at that time, and I'll send everybody these articles because it's kind of interesting, was that now all of a sudden, the way the Chinese communist system was designed is, again, you can no longer, passing school with an extra, getting a 1 point higher on your test really wasn't going to determine your collegiate, your university any longer. So the only way for them to be able to stand out was through the strength of their political association, which came out of the school.
Right, and I think people need to understand that the way China works, and this actually even predates communism. This predates the idea of the Gaokao, or the high school and the overall test at the end of high school, the Mandarins, the actual system of the Mandarins, the imperial testing that went on in dynastic China. The way that they don't have sort of the Western system that we do, where you graduate high school and then you kind of go into this chaos mode where you sort of just do whatever you want for a while, figure out what school you want to go to, the school you can get into, you study whatever you feel like there, and then you try to get some kind of job afterwards. In China, no. Right? Everything's on a track in China. There are tracks for every profession, there are tracks for every school, there are tracks for every individual. And in order to get to the higher level, the next step, right, the next rung in this hierarchy along this track, you have to perform at a certain level, you have to ace certain tests, you have to get these higher grades, you have to become a member of the Young Pioneers. That's sort of the communist youth in China, the Red Youth. And so if you were able to check all those boxes, okay, now you can get into this track, then this profession can open up to you, that profession can open up to you. It's a completely different system than the United States. And by the way, if you do not do well on that high school test, the Gaokao, if you fail that, if you fail it too many times, you can't take it anymore. Your life is now on the down track, right? You are going to be doing menial labor for the rest of your life, and there is no path up for upward mobility for you, economically speaking. It just doesn't exist because China doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and she came out of a system, and I want to get into this in a second, but I'm just so interested in this. She came out of a system where you were scored, just essentially almost a social credit system that existed back then. However, you were scored based upon your kind of revolutionary potential, whether you were a participant or whether you weren't, whether your family was a landlord or your family wasn't. The lowest quality of the person back then was, were they a landowner? Were they any type of a capitalist?
Yeah, if you were a landlord, and you can see this if you go into Marxist Twitter, left-wing Twitter today. The landlords are the worst scum of the worst scum. If you were a landlord in China at the beginning of the communist revolution, you probably didn't make it.
So I see a lot of that, and now I'm going to skip forward back to Antifa because I'm so interested. I see Antifa as
they're parallel funnels of radicalization.
They really are. It's been fascinating to me, and I think I shared with you a few days ago something I recently had discovered, which was about the thought control that was used, and it wasn't kind of the Marxist type of thought control. It wasn't very Lenin type of thought control. It didn't use a lot of physical force as much as it used sending people to prison for these kind of thought systems and the struggle sessions. Struggle sections were extremely, extremely effective. And then we see evidence of it now, of the struggle session without any implicit coercive action of violence.
I'm waiting every day these lately. And actually there was, it's horrible that this happened, but also in a sense, very revealing that this happened in Loudoun County. Apparently there was this woman who just gave a speech at one of these school board meetings, these sort of PTA meetings, where she gets up and she's actually from China, and she says that she was a young girl and remembers the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And it's very rare when you find someone who is actually there, who's willing to speak publicly about the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And she says, I saw the same things then in China that I see now in the United States.
I do too. You know what I see? And there's a question here, and I want to be responsive to it because it's such an interesting question. I see kids coming down from the mountains. I already see that happening, where if you come from any type of a privileged existence, it now has to be stripped from you. And any type of privilege in terms of anything that wealth might have acquired for you, such as education, they're extremely contemptuous of, and they want to strip you of all that privilege. Doesn't make a difference whether you're white, black. That's just kind of this veneer that they use. Anything that was a reward of a capitalist system. So in Down from the Mountain, kids were horribly, and I haven't heard her speech, but I know what these kids endured. So if she's of that era, I can tell you what she endured. They were sent down from the mountain. They were given, at first the government said, we're only going to send you down to a regional farm where you're going to work for a few months.
Right.
And then some of them would be some of them would negotiate what their terms were going to be. We're going to send you down for 2 years and 3 years. And initially there was some type of mediation that you could go through, how long you were going to get sent down there for. Very, very quickly, it became, if you had any type of a wealth and you were kind of failing on their scoring system, which is, as you've identified, landlords or whatever it was, these girls were being raped. Not just, this was a part of their life. They were literally having to hide for years because of the amount of vengeance. And, you've got 450 million Marxists back then. These are communists that still are over there that very dedicated Marxist, extremely dedicated Marxist. Many people in America don't realize that the Chinese Communist Party is hated within that system, because they're looked at as capitalists by these really angry Marxists who they lost their parents. These are people that have a vivid memory of what they fought for.
Yeah, so this, in many ways, joining the CCP today in China is not a sign of Marxism, right? It's a sign of prestige. It is the elite. It is being part of the club. It is literally the ruling class. So we don't have this in America. We have the ruling class, but we don't have a partyized system of it. Anyone can join the Democrat Party, the Republican Party, but this isn't like that, right? To join the CCP and to achieve higher rank and higher level in it, you need to be invited, you need to be invoked, you need to be indoctrinated into all of this. And so it's seen as actually a great honor to say, oh, this so-and-so, they're a party member, right? So, and if they're a party member at a higher level, then and of course there's community party members. There's someone who's assigned for the party for certain neighborhoods, that type of thing. And yes, that's prestigious, but on the level of that neighborhood. But when you get higher up, right, this is your mark of prestige. This is your entry into the higher classes. So there actually is a very strong class system in China.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, the Marxists would obviously have quite an issue with that.
So I see, the first time I thought of Antifa, and I'm so interested in Antifa, I got so many more questions, but was the first time I kind of saw a demonstration. It looked exactly to me like the tactics of the Red Guard, deliberately looked exactly like it, was an assault against Andy. No.
Right.
And where I guess they came up to his house. I even reached out to Andy at the time. They came up to his house, the garb that they were wearing, the tactics were very clearly instrumentalized. These were very rehearsed in the way they carried themselves, in the way they, you know more about the stuff than I do, but the way they had somebody assigned for violence and they had somebody assigned.
Yeah, I mean, when you see, specifically that video or any of the videos of people, you see this in London, the milkshaking stuff actually starts in the UK and then it travels. So we call that TTP flow. So tactics, techniques, procedures, flow, TTP flow into North America, the same way that the Hong Kong protesters would have the umbrellas. Now Antifa is using umbrellas, right? That's TTP flow. You don't need to be in the Middle East training the way for some of this stuff, because you can do it via the internet, using social media for this, right? So this is where you get 5th generation warfare, open source networks, open source insurgencies, the use of the green dot laser pointers to blind your assailants, right? This is also something that's an example of TTP flow. But with the milkshaking, what people don't realize is, yes, of course, it's done as a form of humiliation, but the reason that they target someone's eyes with the milkshake when it's a black bloc doing it is the attempt is to blind you, so that immediately after the blinding takes place in the first instance, then there are 2 or 3 Antifa attackers within the black bloc that have then been designated to go in and to use violence to strike, whether it be the head, in Andy's case, other people's cases, go for the ribs, go for other implements, and then there'll be other members of Antifa at the same, and this is all done in conjunction, right? It's all tactically. You've got to watch it in slow motion, some of these videos, for people to understand what you're seeing. They will put up the umbrellas in attempt to hide the footage from being taken, so that people can't see their tactics, people can't see what they're doing, right? So that's 3 levels of a black bloc right there, and we call them the greens, the yellows, and the reds. So the greens, they might be the people holding the umbrellas. They're not there to do violence, but they're there to provide cover for people who are doing the violence, so that the person who's committing a crime, committing a violent assault, can then blend back in with the black bloc, so the police aren't able to find out who it was, right? This is the whole reason black blocs were invented, Germany in the 1960s. Then the yellows, we think of it as a pyramid, right? The yellows, that's your NCOs, your non-commissioned officers. When I watched that video that you just showed of the DeploraBall, the first person identified, that's Lacey McCauley. She was once the head yellow of Antifa in Washington, D.C. She's directing people, kind of directing traffic, saying, hey, you go here, you go there.
I'm just going to interrupt for one moment. Just because you mentioned her twice, have you ever actually had a chance to have, I don't know how it goes within kind of your adversarial roles. Have you guys ever actually spoken to each other about?
Oh yeah, many times.
Yeah.
Many times. I'll tell you that story in a second, but let me get to the final is the reds, and the reds, that's your pinnacle of the pyramid. It's your smallest rung, but it's also the rung that they are going out and committing the violence. So the greens exist to protect the reds, the yellows are directing the greens and reds are the ones that are actually conducting this direct action. So Lacey McCauley, who has been sort of, I guess she's in semi-retirement because she ended up having a kid. And so she's off raising him. Though I believe, I can't remember if it's actually a boy or girl. I don't keep that much tabs on her. And but I believe she has said I'm raising an anti-fascist baby in terms of that, but she won't be as active as she once was, and so other members of the organization are trying to step up more in Washington D.C. But she's actually someone, if you can see, when they came to assault me at George Washington University in 2017, this is the one where I'm filming with my camera and they came up and punched me and try to knock it out of my hand. She's the one who jumps in, and immediately when the police are they come, because it's campus police, they come from right across the street. She starts yelling, "Oh, he was using racial slurs. He was using racial slurs," right? And then all the other members of the group start repeating it. He was using racial slurs. He was using racial slurs. Well, of course, because I have the camera going and I have video and I'm recording the entire thing, I play it for the officers and they can see I'm just standing there doing my job reporting. I'm not using any racial slurs whatsoever, and they're just completely lying. But you can tell that she's the one who gives them that line of what to say. Actually, when we talked about that time when I used a deception operation to send them to Maryland instead of where our event was actually being held. She was leading that group, though I think not so many people actually showed up at the very end of it. And so we were singing songs to her and the rest of Antifa from sort of inside. There was sort of like a balcony where we were singing down to them in the street, and she was there. And there's a Periscope video back when I used to do the Periscope lives more often. I think you're one of the last people that's actually still using Twitter Live. So kudos to you for that. You're the
Lone Ranger, the
last Mohican.
No, you have to use it. Everything else is being censored. Everything else is going away.
I'm aware, but it's just the platform is terrible. It is the worst, and I thank everybody who's watching.
But I know what's coming next.
Worst platform.
I know what's coming next. I did text you some of this stuff, and I know some of the people, and it's one of the last places that hasn't been thoroughly algorithmic and that's
why after people like myself and others in conservative media or just independent media became big via Periscope, that's why you can see that they completely stopped investing in the Periscope. They completely start divesting of it. They shut it down earlier this year and say they're moving to Twitter Live, but there's no investment whatsoever in Twitter Live. They're trying to copy Clubhouse with Twitter Spaces, and this is strategic. It is a strategic decision. But anyway, I digress because the point was I was walking through Union Station in Washington, D.C., and I happened to see a group of the remember when the left-wing protesters would dress up in like Handmaid's Tale back when the Kavanaugh protests were going on?
I did.
So they did it again for Amy Coney Barrett, but it actually started with Kavanaugh. Well, I see a group of them at the Starbucks of all things, right? And they're, kind of getting breakfast and getting coffee. And I'm walking through doing my normal, hey, it's Jack Posobiec. Welcome to my morning. Let's hang out for a little bit. Let's spend some time together. And I turn and look, and who do I see? And it's Lacey McCauley from DC Antifa, who, because they have their hoods off because they're eating, right? And she's in there in one of these paid protest groups, being involved with the protest against Kavanaugh and all this. So at that point, it's actually kind of funny because, she sees me and I see her, but it's sort of like when you see someone you work with, but you're not at work kind of thing. It's, hey, aren't you? Yeah.
That was my question. Do you think that is she a functionary, or is she really kind of this adherent to a communist? Is this kind of an industry for her, or is this is this a commercial enterprise for her?
Oh, well, I think all of the above. I don't necessarily think that she's doing this for the money. I think she's actually someone who probably has a lot of raw intellect, and if she were able to channel that into something productive for society, she'd be very successful. She comes from a very successful background. Our family is a family of means in the Northern Virginia area, and I'm not trying to, not putting out any more information than that. Just that
understood.
Family. And from a wealthy area, that's all I'm saying. And I have no interest to whatsoever, right? Nothing. Wish her well, and I pray for her.
Completely understood. It was not an invitation.
When I pray my rosary every single day, and I pray for you, Lacey. I do. And when you see people like this, though, who have been totally lost in one of these extremist organizations, you realize that they've given up so much to be a member of this that. I think she's someone who's totally committed to the cause. I think she's someone who doesn't question it. I think she's someone who doesn't question the presuppositions of it or the toll that it's taken on her life and the lives of others. The people who've been locked up around her through Antifa DC, the people that through my journalism and the reporting of others against this group. And I particularly don't think she cares about the lives that she's targeted, the people that she's targeted, and not only of the people who have gone to jail from her organization, but also people who have been smeared and attacked and assaulted from the organization because she is so committed to, again, this moral framework that's pushed by people saying it's okay to punch these guys. Not all punches are equal. You are on the side of the angels. You need to overthrow the system of the United States. You need to, destroy the police and disband the military and everything else. And every Jack Posobiec who stands in your way is an enemy of that.
I got a question, and I want to get to Ben's Max. Oh, I'm sorry. I said rude again. So I want to get to Ben's Max question, but first I got one more question. So with these columns, I'm so fascinated by this stuff. So they've got the different columns, the different colored columns. That's the same thing that.
Well, I can answer Ben's question. He says, "Will they still be a thing in 2 years?" I mean, they're not going away anytime soon. They're not. Absolutely not.
What happens? What happens next?
Well, what happens next is, so currently, if you look at where things are, because of the way that national security operations have been conducted against Trump supporters in the aftermath of January 6th, you really don't see many conservatives holding public events anymore. So the next thing that happens is that the minute any conservative group wants to hold an event, a public event, like a memorial, like the one I talked about for Ashley Babbitt in Sacramento, they will then become targeted by Antifa if they're in one of the areas that's around one of these sort of regional chapters. Of course, the Pacific Northwest is always going to be the biggest hotbed for that. And up there, look, they're talking about instituting CHAZ again. They want Cal Anderson Park to be theirs again. They still view that as sort of spiritually and rightfully theirs. And because national security is not doing anything, FBI is not doing anything, Homeland Security is not doing anything about these groups, when they are charged, when they are indicted, as some people in Portland have been recently, the charges are very light or the charges get dropped. When, we talked, you played the video earlier of the DeploraBall, right? Hundreds of people who were arrested from the DeploraBall and the attacks on Trump's inauguration had their charges dropped against them. Not only dropped against them, but the ACLU got involved and got them a $1.6 million settlement from the city of Washington, D.C. for these Antifa guys that had been involved in, as I talked about, I was in the room when they were planning to attack President Trump's, attack the inauguration of the President of the United States to ensure that there is not a peaceful transfer of power. Right, literally, as what's the parlance, an attack on our democracy, and the DC police ends up paying them $1.6 million in a settlement that is promoted by the ACLU.
Well, how much did that divide up to per person? Do you think? How many participants were in that action?
I think it's about 200.
That's a good chunk of change.
I'm sure the lawyers get a cut and all that.
Yeah, of course, but that's a good financial. It's the same way that they gave George Floyd's family kind of martyrdom money. I mean, it definitely does create that behavior.
When people say, "Oh, these groups are going to go away," I said, "Why are they going to go away? They're making bank. It's very lucrative."
Yeah, it was obvious to me with George Floyd when they gave him the money. I thought they were going to find him guilty. I thought it was and not because he was guilty. And I would listen to Will Chamberlain, who was doing the best analysis of it every day. And because he was doing a very good forensics on it. It was really the only person I was listening to. And but I thought that. They were going to have
events.com, best news source in the world.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot. You're a part of that now, man. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's awesome. His coverage of that was excellent. He's done a lot of really, really good coverage on things that he's kind of my go-to for certain things with some of the
for legal analysis, right? I mean, he's just a secret weapon.
All of the lawsuits that were being filed by Trump constituents or Trump parties that were somehow related to him, he was doing excellent analysis of that one. I remember he was talking about the Texas one, which was getting all the attention. And he was doing regular coverage of it, and he was doing a really good job of setting people's expectations. Otherwise, I might have gotten excited about it also.
Yeah, no, Will can slice and dice that stuff. When it comes to legal profession, there's that phrase, you have to be able to read the stitches on a fastball. And when it comes to some of these lawsuits or statutes, et cetera, legal proceedings, I just, that's Will, right? That's why I'm just glad I know that guy, because I can call him when I've got a question.
The discretion, you can hear my cats in the background, right? And you have a dog too. So your dog's locked up. My cats kind of roam around.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you hear it's my 2-year-old and his mom that are out there practicing something or other. I think they were doing letters and numbers.
I thought that they were going to find the George Floyd people guilty just because the jury was so intimidated that they didn't have a choice. If you want to stay alive, I mean, Will was 100% right. 100% right.
You see Antifa then going and attacking the home, or I think it's actually the former home of one of the experts that testified on the use of force on behalf of Chauvin, saying, "Look, I've reviewed many other use of forces in the past. I've reviewed the Minnesota Police Department manual. This is consistent. It's within the guidelines of what's taught. It's within the guidelines of what's legal." He certainly thought he was following those guidelines at the time. And so Antifa attacked this guy's house. They actually went after this guy's house. They put a pig's head on it.
I didn't realize that. I saw Maxine Waters was there like the day before, and the jury didn't have any choice. It was honestly, I hate to say it, but I think that they're if you're on the jury, I'm not going to risk my life for this guy.
Right. So when you're looking at a question of what's Antifa going to be up to, that's another great example. Jury intimidation, right? Because there's 3 other police officers that are involved in that. There's a federal trial that's going to be going on involved with that now because Merrick Garland has put hate crime charges on all the officers. And in any other case where you have one of these situations of an officer involved shooting where it becomes controversial like that, you are going to see Antifa and their affiliates out there intimidating juries, and a pliant media who is going to be out there doing everything they can to come right up to the moment of doxing the jurors so that people know who they are. Now, meanwhile, when one of the jurors came out publicly, I guess, was the only person who thought to go look through this guy's social media. And what do I find there but a picture on Facebook that is actually his uncle's Facebook where he's tagged of him wearing a George Floyd shirt and having marched in an Al Sharpton march in Washington, D.C., where George Floyd's family spoke at the event. Right. And so I put that forward and I say, look, this guy was one of the jurors out there. And he's just straight up a member of this organization. And you're going to allow him to call himself impartial. I mean, obviously he tainted the jury. And, we'll see that Eric Nelson, the lawyer in that case, has used my reporting to call for a new trial, saying that the jury was completely biased by this. Obviously it was completely non-disclosed during voir dire, during the process of when he was chosen. So, we'll see what happens there. I don't see that happening. And Dershowitz basically actually came out he was doing an interview with Julie Grant on Court TV and said, look, this has become so political that the only place you'll be able to go for any type of legal recourse or any type of legal relief will be the Supreme Court, because they're the highest level. And for everyone else, it's going to be too political.
So then,
and Antifa plays a role in that. They absolutely play a role.
So projecting forward in response, and Ben's MSX, thank you so much for joining us. Is that now they become because of the financial reward that's been built into it, right? With what happened in DC, what happens in terms of the visibility, and that you can turn that into a type of currency, right? It turns into a type of currency. It even becomes like a live action Reddit upvote, where there's some type of emotional reward for it, that it now becomes much more part of an operating judiciary protest infrastructure, that it builds up kind of like a judiciary infrastructure for protest.
Right. And this is actually why you see the phrase anarcho-tyranny being used to describe the situation of what's going on right now, because it doesn't necessarily seem as much that Antifa is destabilizing the country and then driving us towards an overthrow where they are the ones who are in charge. No. They're creating the destabilization so that outside forces are able to come in and gain more power over the system than they were ever supposed to have. So you're seeing this through the rise of corporate power, corporate ownership in America. I know you've talked about that. You've seen it in the way that they are allowing these changes to go on in schools with critical race theory because of their push on the Overton window, to the current reporting that I'm doing in the United States military, where you've got battalion commanders. This battalion commander at Fort Carson is out there saying, if you are a white male, you are part of the problem. And he's instructing his soldiers that. So creating these racial divisions within our own ranks. You want to talk about serving the goals of the CCP. Well, I can't think of a better one than that.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's something that's so interesting to me. And I want to get back to the CNN thing. Would that be all right with you? Because I'm so interested in when CNN was doing all that recruiting.
Yeah, that would be good. I gotta let's wrap in like say 10 or so.
Perfect. So when CNN was doing all that recruiting, right? You must have seen an uptick like in their activity and in their violence, or were you?
Absolutely, because what you've done, what you're telling people. So you've got this mass, right? We're talking about sort of your potential recruits, and so you've got this mass of unruly, disenfranchised young males They're not nihilistic in many senses because religion and all forms of religion have been driven from the public square. And so they can't find any upward mobility. They can't find that proper track in life. So where do they go? Well, they get angry. They get angry at the system. And here comes CNN and the New York Times, Washington Post, etc. Everyone knows the litany, telling them, they say, well, if you put on one of those red hats, you'll be prosecuted. But if you go punch the people in the red hats, you'll be celebrated. We'll put you on CNN. In some cases, there'll be financial rewards for it. So join one of these groups and be one of the good guys, be one of the guardian angels of society. And I actually talk about how during the 2016, this seemingly started small, right? But all of this led to the situation where we're in now, where I talk about how the man who charged the stage in 2016 at a Trump rally was then interviewed later that night by CNN. They gave this guy a platform who was charging the stage, trying to conduct political violence. And CNN goes and rewards him by giving him a platform, putting him on their megaphone saying, let us hear who you are and what you're about. The same thing that Vice did. Fast forward a few years. Now Vice is sitting down with a murderer, an actual known murderer, where we have this on tape killing someone in cold blood. And Vice says, we really just want to get this guy's side of the story.
I want to get to some questions because there's a lot.
You use somebody's wrong, wrong pronouns, because then you lose your job.
There's a lot of questions here, and I've been so negligent because I've been so interested in all this. John Robb is here. We both know John Robb. John Robb is awesome, right?
Yes. Yeah. John, how's it going?
John is awesome. John and I have done like 3 of these. Did you know that? I think 3 or 2 of them. John expected Trump to get his social media account pulled. We found an old clip that he and I did, and he was like, look, they're going to pull it. They're going to pull his clip.
But was that prediction post Jan 6 or pre?
It was before January 6th.
Okay, very good. Very good.
Yeah, it was amazing. I'll repost it because it was really amazing. So John Robb says just the opposite of what happened in Germany after the 1929 Communist International riots in Berlin.
Well, yeah, so the Communist International riots, that's why. So Antifa didn't exist by name, right? The prior name of it was the Red Front. The Red Front, or the Red Front Fighting Brigade, I would butcher the German. It's Rotfront Kampfverband, something or other. I don't speak Nazi. And they're outlawed in Germany after these riots. They're outlawed. They're shut down. They're persecuted. They are targeted. And so Ernst Thälmann goes back to the Communist Party, but the fighting brigades are completely shut down at that point. That's why 3 years later, he's got to form a new organization, and he can't call it sort of the Communist Fighting Group, because keep in mind at this point, you've got the National Socialists have the brown shirts, the SDS, the Social Democrats, and that's sort of like the majority party has the Freikorps, and then you have the communists, but they don't have theirs because their fighting group has been, that you have all these people that are left over from World War I, former soldiers of the Kaiser looking for something to do. And so that Ernst says, well, we can't create another Red Front. We can't create a communist group because that would be illegal. So what we've got to do is create an anti-fascist group. And that will be what we use to fight against all of our enemies. Of course, that usually being the social fascism of the Weimar Republic. This is an order from Stalin. So actually, the reason that they call themselves anti-fascist is because to be a communist fighting group at this point, fighting brigade, and to organize in that fashion has been outlawed, right? So this is the absolute opposite of what happened in Germany. So they go after these groups, they prosecute them, they shut them down. And, the communists are locked up in many cases.
We're gonna continue on just because there's a lot of questions, and I want to just be respectful of your time because we're going to close it down.
Let's fire through some of them.
So Brian Hatterick, thank you so much for joining us. Nice picture, right? So Brian Hatterick says, why actions by Antifa are largely condoned by the government and media? Won't they eventually come for them soon?
Because in many cases they're on the same side. That's probably the easy answer.
But that doesn't mean that Antifa won't also come for them. I mean, they're on the same side, but it's not a very high fidelity alliance. It's just like an opportunistic type of thing.
Correct. They will come for them when, and you're starting to see some elements of that because now the Biden administration has been installed. They have taken power. And so the usefulness of Antifa to go after, to conduct wanton violence in cities isn't there anymore. But Antifa is still useful in going after, well, let's just say people like me, Trump supporters, any big name Trump supporter who's trying to get some kind of traction in the world. That will be the use for Antifa from going forward, as well as for these one-off operations like jury intimidation.
Which sounds like the jury intimidation is no longer going to be a one-off. It's now going to be kind of a part of their typical kind of what they do.
Sure. Well, in the sense of a case-by-case basis.
And Siobhan, I want to thank Siobhan so much for being here. Says, does anybody in DC politics understand Antifa in any depth, or do they just brush it off?
If by DC politics you mean the establishment politics of each party, no, they don't. I don't think so.
And Janan, thank you so much for being here. Says, who is funding them? So from your experience, is there just one or two kind of oligarchs, or is it really a syndicate of who's funding them?
It's much more of a syndicate. In many cases, particularly when you look at groups like Refuse Fascism, we see indications from their own leaders talking about people like Tom Steyer, talking about organizations like Open Society, cutting money to them. Refuse Fascism is clearly the largest Antifa organization in the country. They are not the most violent, but they certainly are the most visible. They have the most hierarchy. Project Veritas has them on tape talking about funding from Tom Steyer. By and large, though, when you see some of the more violent elements, these violent regional cells, they are, in terms of their direct action, a lot of it is crowdsourced, crowdfunded. They're using these payment processors, Cash App, Venmo, PayPal. They're not shut down the way that Trump supporters or conservatives are shut down from them, or even kicked off of banking and credit cards. But you do see their legal representation, right? So the National Lawyers Guild, which does provide legal representation to them, will be funded in many cases by large left-wing foundational wealth. I call it the cornucopia of corruption of dark money networks that are going into these things. And just recently, as I said before already, have ACLU, 1.6 million in DC.
And this one. So Jerome CHAZ says, and thank you so much for joining us. And I like that picture. Says, there are too many degenerates out in society. Antifa probably is growing quickly. Have you seen evidence of Antifa growing? Have you seen any kind of shifts in their kind of in their ranks of who's joining and the attrition rate of their membership?
Well, one thing that I said that, as we were taught in the IC to track was TTP flow. And so in a sort of spiritual sense, you can start to see Antifa tactics now creeping into school systems. You can see Antifa doxing and unpersoning and these intimidation tactics being used against families, against teachers, principals, elected officials who don't go their way, the military, the workplace, where, if you commit wrongthink, you are targeted, you are unpersoned, you are persecuted for your beliefs, if we're stepping out of, again, going back to the Cultural Revolution, you are a counter-revolutionary, right? Counter-revolutionary was sort of the ultimate thought crime, or anti-party, as in the case of Xi Jinping's father. And so you really do see these, and these are Antifa tactics. These are tactics that were pioneered by Antifa. And of course, they are the spiritual successors of the Red Guards, who used the exact same tactics, though in a much more brutal method back in the 1960s in China.
And somebody asked about Proud Boys. I'm very curious about them also, so I'm not sure if I can find that question right now, but I will find it as you're answering it. So are the Proud Boys now, you did this in January, I think, of 2017, you and Mike Cernovich were trying to kind of tamp down the a possible right-wing response to this, or tamp down the, de-escalate some of the language that was being used. And I forget how you guys.
June of 17.
Yeah. So do you see Proud Boys kind of reemerging as a threat now? Because there does seem to be the possibility for violence. I mean, I remember during hoax.
Well, quite frankly, it's not only do they exist as you said, a right wing response to a lot of this, but you also see an evolution of violence when it comes to groups like the Boogaloo Boys, who don't necessarily neatly fit into any of these groups, though, to use the malice formulation again, the black flag comes in many colors. Typically, when you see Boogaloo Boys, they are anarchists. They are anti-police. Certainly, they are anti-government. but they are pro-gun and they are pro-liberty. So you could see them as more of like an anarcho-capitalist rather than anarcho-communist. That being said, the violence that's been conducted by Boogaloo adherents has been of a level of sophistication in terms of direct killings, direct murders, attempted operations against elected officials that is far higher than anything that these Antifa groups have done on their own. And I think it does represent an evolution of these tactics that I know it doesn't neatly fit in sort of a right versus left kind of formulation, but when you look at these groups, they're clearly an evolution of something that we've already seen. And going back to it, this is the very reason, as I said at the start, that I never wanted anyone to cross that line and allow the opening of political violence, the justification, normalization of political violence in the United States.
How are they called the Boogaloo Boys? Boogaloo?
Yeah, the Boogaloo Boys. There's a whole chapter in the final version of the book. We actually did include an entire chapter on them. So
are they? Where is their funding coming from? And can you say that they are just an ideology or they're just an idea? I mean, can that same type of Christopher Wray logic be crossed the transom to the right wing also?
I would say typically they are more self-funded. You don't see the type of organization with them as you do with Antifa. They're more self-radicalized adherents. And by the way, I also don't necessarily say that just because you're someone who posted a Boogaloo meme or wore a Hawaiian t-shirt, that's sort of one of the things that makes you an extremist. However, what we have seen are people that adhere to that specific ideology commit acts of extreme violence, very extreme violence, targeted killings of police officers, federal officers, attempted kidnappings. I mean, some attempted bombings, very high level stuff that's would go beyond any of the sort of street violence that we're talking about here. And so again, this is the reason that you clamp down on that stuff very quickly and you don't let any justification of it come out whatsoever, because once you start doing that, people again will take it to the next level.
So do you think that Proud Boys I'm so interested in all this, and I know you want to let go, and I don't want to yet. So hold on. So do you see the Proud Boys, which have really been put under control? I mean, they just can't exist as a legitimate kind of vehicle of protest.
No, I mean, you've seen the forces of the regime be used against them, both from the corporate sector and the public sector. So many of them have been arrested. I believe Joe Biggs is being held still in pretrial detention in Washington, D.C. I could be wrong about where, but I believe he's currently behind bars right now. Enrique Tarrio was arrested before. He was actually brought up on charges before January 6th. I believe it was on the 5th or the 4th when he flew into D.C. to be the national leader of the Proud Boys. If you're a member of that organization, you are exempted from society, or exempted from payment processing, from banking, from social media, et cetera, et cetera. They have used the full force of the both the sort of the corporate state and the public state against them in a way that you haven't seen anyone act against Antifa or against Boogaloo adherents. And so a clear message is being sent here.
So do you expect more violence coming out of Boogaloo, and do you expect it to be kind of assigned to a right wing? You said that Boogaloo Boys doesn't really attach itself to any type of, that they're more kind of maybe anarchistic in that.
They're certainly a form of anarchist. If you understand the actual ideology, they're definitely a form of anarchist. They are anti-police. They are virulently anti-police. They support BLM. They're anti-government, anti-military. That's why they target police and federal officers so frequently, and elected officials. I do worry. I really do worry that when you see the otherization of police that's being done now, that, and I'm not one of these guys who's like, back the blue no matter who, right? Obviously, look, if someone's in a public position, they should all be held to account. They should all be held to the law. No one's above the law, right? And certainly your public officials, whether you be a police officer or an elected official, should be held to a higher standard, right? Because you're a public official. That being said, you can't paint with a broad brush and just say, okay, well, it's justified to use violence against them because they are someone who's quote unquote an oppressor. So this is the type of rhetoric that you see being used against the police. This is the type of rhetoric that led to the death of retired police captain David Dorn in St. Louis, which I don't talk about my role in that, but we actually did. Were able to raise about just under $500,000 for him.
That was the police officer that was killed. And then the person was like, "Why'd you do that to this guy?" Wasn't that it?
And it's caught on Facebook Live, and they said, all that's for a TV.
Yeah. That's right. And that's right. And I remember that they just had like Ben Shapiro raised money for AOC's fictitious aunt who actually lives in a real mansion in Miami, but had that little like cool thing.
And it got shut down. It actually, they GoFundMe shut down. See, I didn't use GoFundMe because GoFundMe shut down conservatives.
I knew it was going to get shut down because I knew 100% that it was, that picture was even inauthentic. And I knew she didn't want to encourage too much interrogation of the picture or her family's financial wherewithals in Puerto Rico.
Do you think that when Matt Walsh set that up, that was his intent was to kind of destroy
No, I think he's, I don't like.
You think he was earnest?
I don't like those type of conservatives. Honestly, I don't. I think that they really do a disservice because the way I looked at when I heard that they were raising money, I thought of Julie Kelly, right?
Yeah.
And I thought of.
I actually just taped a podcast with her. I think it's going to drop tomorrow.
She's a. And because we need to close up anyway, I'll tell you this, the way I look at you, the way I look at Julie Kelly, the way I look at Al, I'm doing something with Alex Marlowe next week, right?
Oh, it's great. Alex, wonderful. I actually, I feel so bad here. I'll do him a favor because he sent me a copy of his book and I feel so bad that I haven't promoted it for him because I've been promoting my own book. So here's his breaking the news, Alex Marlowe. See that, Alex? I'm promoting your book on a stream that's supposed to be promoting my own book because that's the kind of guy I am.
But this stuff is really important. And it's really important. Everyone knows I've kept kind of a chronicle of the fastest roll-up of power in history. You saw a little bit of just my notes on the Wuhan lab
right,
and some other types of things. My notes are meticulous, right? They're no joke.
Your notes are great, though. They're so easy to read. You've got to make that public someday. I don't know.
I'll never make it
ready
public
for that, but I think you should.
I will never do it because I'll tell you why. Look at what you're writing about Antifa. Let me tell you why it's important. Antifa, as you noted, isn't going away. Their targets will become much more kind of operational. Right now, it just seems like there's some type of a least activist.
No, but you put it in a time capsule for posterity. Then you bury it in Central Park or something, and only give the coordinates to a select group of people.
But isn't that what you're doing with Antifa also? I mean, you're putting it in a time capsule.
In a sense, that's what this book is. So this is a moment in time. This is where we are. This is what we know. But it also in a more meta sense, that's what every book is, right? Books. There's a great line: "Books are lighthouses of knowledge in the sea of time."
But
right?
Just by writing the book that it validates that woman who you said from Antifa, who's kind of now a retired lieutenant or whatever her role was in it, a semi-retired lieutenant, the woman that you had encountered from DC. That you're writing about Antifa just raises your visibility as a target to them. So right. It's not. So there's with Julie Kelly, with her writing about January 6th makes her a target, right? So it is a time capsule because these things will have more value in a few years than they will have now. Because now you're competing with people's mind share about Antifa with all of the other things that the media is throwing at people. People right now everything is happening so fast. People cannot emotionally or intellectually process everything.
Yeah, you can't process. And that's a feature. That's a feature, absolutely, of the current, we used to have a 24-minute or 24-hour news cycle. Now we have a 24-minute, sometimes 24-second news cycle, right? It's beyond human comprehension in many cases. So that's why when I want to put the brakes on with something, and that's why I spent, a year and a half putting this together, writing it, getting in there. Oh, what's that? That's good. Oh, thank you, Jesse. I appreciate that. That's why it's something that I want to be able to look back on and say, hey, I wrote this book and I wrote it when I did. And, you know, maybe I'll look on it in 20 years and say, man, I got everything wrong. And I wish I had said things this way or that way. But at the same time, it also is a reminder to myself of, you know, that's who I was in 2020. And that's where my thinking was. And who knows where that'll be in, you know, in 20 years from now and 30 years from now. It'll be something that my children will be able to see someday, like, hey, this was dad, you know, this was what dad was like. And, you know, sort of all these videos that are out there and all the public work that I've done. I'm sure, I hope that Twitter will be destroyed and disbanded and Google and all the rest by then. But, you know, we'll see whether or not it lives on or not.
But so your stuff has been very important as part of my, you know, log, because I'm so fascinated by Antifa, and I call them kind of the phalanx of the megacorps. Right. And then we did something with Keith Preston, and he was talking about anarchists, and he has somewhat of a different description of these things. And I heard you on Tim Pool talking about Antifa and its relationship with anarchists. You and I kind of talked about that. I'm fascinated by
Tim wanted to kind of debate about how Antifa are not the traditional textbook anarchist, and which is certainly true, but they are also a form of anarcho-communist. And that's basically my point, was that they ascribe to a form of anarcho-communism, but he's actually right in the sense that they do not follow the precepts of a traditional anarchist.
And we could talk about your book for so long, because I still have so many more questions. I know we're not going to be able to get to them, but I'm really just so fascinated. And I'll tell you again why, and then we're going to talk about your book again for a second. By the way, we're talking about the 24-hour news cycle, and we're talking about books. My beloved Reese, who co-founded CNN. And you might recall one of the first times I ever reached out to you via DM was to ask you if you knew Pat Buchanan, because Reese had just passed on, and I wanted to tell Pat Buchanan. And since Pat Buchanan and I have become friends, so that's pretty awesome.
Right, who I don't actually know.
I know you didn't. You told me that you didn't.
I know. Do I know? I know people who know Pat Buchanan, but I don't.
No, I know. Now it's all done. He lives by you, actually, as it turns out.
He's in that, again, Northern Virginia area.
Yeah, his wife handles everything. But I think of this as this is a very important period of time, and I think that it's important that you write about Antifa, and it's because Antifa, I think, is going to become more of a social movement, almost a political party in itself. I don't think that they can go away. I think that they're just getting more and more adherents. I know very successful tech kids, programmers, kids who are making $500,000 a year easily, who just sold their companies for millions, who think that they're Antifa. They think somehow that they're Antifa, but they just haven't employed the violence of it. So I think Antifa just keeps on growing. And I think now is a very important time for everybody to record it. I kind of feel like when I write these things in my log, and you only saw 4 of them, about the Wuhan lab and the PHIC and what the death toll, had they acted quicker or sooner, or, you know, everything else that I did, and the violations. What is that? If
they'd come clean
in different scenarios, and the violations of the articles. I've got that probably on about 80 different things. It's very important because I think of myself as Anne Frank, because I think we're going through this incredible transformation. I do think ultimately that there's going to be horrible human casualties coming from this. You don't have things like Antifa that just, the candle burns out and it goes away. You don't have that. As you noted within, talking about China, is in China, this was the apparatus that was created to develop the Red Guard. The Red Guard came out of the schools in China. It was not a product of this organic product that came up from the streets. It came up through the education institutions. They're going to be employed, I think, for incredible violence. I think they're going to be like they're going to be the bus drivers that bring people to the camps.
Well, put it this way, whether or not that happens, I certainly hope it doesn't get to that point. I certainly hope that at some point, I do believe, and I think I talked about this on Tipple as well, I do believe that I think that they certainly don't have anywhere near the critical mass for any of the things that you've outlined. Would they want to have conservatives in gulags? Absolutely. Would they want to be able to put me in a gulag and separate me from my children? Absolutely. But they're not going to. And I don't think they have the political
I'm not worried about you. I don't think it's going to be you. If you take a look at the language that.
But what I mean to say is, though, in or people like me who kind of are these independent voices out there, I don't think they have the critical mass that they need. I still think there's too many normies that don't ascribe to it. And you're seeing the backlash already because they've gone after the schools at the lowest level, right? They've gone after the lowest common denominator of these local school districts. And you look at how virulent the backlash has been. They are radicalizing in the opposite direction. These teachers and families and moms and dads getting together saying, we get this out of our schools, get this away from our kids, because when you go after somebody's children at that age, you're tripping all sorts of spiritual, biological, primal kind of red lines that, in a way that when they target them in college doesn't really, people say, oh, well, whatever, that's, you're beyond the age of reason at that point, you're over 18, so it's fine, whatever, go through those Marxist indoctrination centers. But when you start introducing it at the smaller or the younger ages, that really does produce a response. And I think there's something very good in that energy. There's something very powerful in that backlash. And I would want all of those people I would encourage them to read this book as well, so they could understand exactly what it is that they're up against.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I'm going to put your thing back on here now, because we are going to close up, and you've been awesome, and there's been so much even more to discuss. We could. As I
always am.
I will say, I don't think that after Antifa, what happens next is after people like you and me. I think it gets more. I saw the document that Darren Beatty and Revolver came out with, where it was about identifying extreme ultra patriots, or however it was worded.
Yes, that was a DARPA document that had been discussed, and I've done reporting on this as well, where they are talking about going after, your basic middle of the road types of conservatives, and just, it's almost to the point where it's like if someone's got an American flag with the red, white, and blue out front. Yeah, that's what you're hearing from the New York Times, right? If someone has an American flag, then they must be an extremist.
The language that document used, though, that he had was it reminded me a lot. I had to reread the Gulag Archipelago, because I was like, I just read it. As soon as I heard the document calling it extreme patriotism or whatever it is, I immediately reread Gulag Archipelago. I took this note on it. So it was the Extraordinary Commission for Struggle Against Counter-Revolution, Sabotage, and Speculation. That was the Cheksha, and it sounds identical in actuality and in practice to what the Department of Homeland Security is threatening. And it also reminded me a lot of the similar documents that came out of Mao's governance. But there's talking about things like
what happens with these regimes, that they become paranoid, right? They become paranoid that people will band together and rise up against them, and so they form these secret police organizations, totalitarian organizations, to be able to shut down any instance of that happening. The movie Child 44, if anybody watches that has a lot of that involved in it, where similar circumstances going on. And it's about secret police in the USSR, and it's, again, right, it's something that we never thought would happen in the United States of America. The last place you ever thought would happen. My wife's from the Soviet Union. They still have a KGB in her home country, and so she, her watching the Chauvin trial, to go back to that for a second, she was saying how, just remarking, is that you guys have lawyers and juries and evidence and witnesses in your favor. So, boy, back home, you don't have any of that stuff. You walk in there and the judge tells you you're guilty, and then your parents never see you again. That's what we have back home. So the systems that you guys have in America, the things that they are starting to mess with, you really should not take this stuff for granted, because once it's gone, you are going to realize very quickly how important it was. So I think on that note, I'm going to have to sign off.
But we're going to remind everybody once again of your book. And I would like actually also to ask everybody to buy the book, because I think it's such an important thing. And I
appreciate that.
I think it's such an important thing. And as soon as I heard of your book, I went out and bought it. As soon as I saw there was even a link to your book, I surprised you with it.
You found, I still don't even know how you did it. You found this like draft version of the book that nobody's even supposed to see publicly. It was like I think we just uploaded it as like a placeholder so that we could get the Amazon going, and somehow you found a way to get it.
Because I don't want you to in any way kind of not give yourself, the hard enough pat on the back for what you did, because although we haven't discussed it, your infiltration of CHAZ, right? Yep. And your ability to kind of observe them immediately and to observe Raz, who I guess was right next to you, and kind of observe their kind of organizational infrastructure.
Well, if people want to see that, of course, check out the book, antifabook.com. We also have the documentary. So I did it backwards, right? I did the movie first and then did the book that the movie is based on. So the movie is antifamovie.com. You can go see it right there.
I'm going to ask you one question before we go. I'm going to show you a video. I'm going to show it to you for a few seconds and then tell me what you think of this. Because is it possible that this activates Antifa? And I'll show you what further. Let me just show you this.
Okay.
It's such an amazing clip. It's terrifying. Let me just find it. I didn't have it ready. You'll know the clip when you see it. And it's about, while I look for it, it's about like some anti-Trumper said that now Trump is out of office. He's going to have an army of tens of millions of people. Did you ever see this thing?
Yeah. I've seen it. I forget it. That's one of those like CNN type people.
Whatever it was, yeah. And it was like now that Trump is out of office, he has a new army of tens of millions of people. And
so Eric Hoffer wrote that every mass movement, not every mass movement needs a god, but every mass movement needs a devil. And so for the past 5 years, 6 years, their devil has been Trump. Has been Donald Trump. He's in the form of the person, but also in the sort of totem, the avatar of Donald Trump. And now that he's sort of off the stage, he's on the side of the stage in a sense. Well, they need a new demon. They need a new Satan. And so that new Satan, in many of these cases, they are trying to make that to be Trump supporters, Trump voters. And this is, again, where you see these same types of tactics that were used from the 1960s, the otherization, the demonization being unleashed.
So I'll go back and then I'll show you the video, but I want to be respectful. I know we're going away. I know.
Oh, do you have it?
I do have the clip.
Okay.
But before I show you the clip, I want to say this. So when I saw that document that Darren had from the Department of Homeland Security and what you've discussed I referenced the CHAZ and what they were also doing within China. Within their opportunity to throw people in jail, is I don't think they're really going after white supremacists. They don't need to go after white supremacists because the substance of that document that Darren had for Revolver was extreme patriots are people who think that the government has exceeded its constitutional authority.
Right.
They don't want to recognize the legitimacy of the regime, and every regime in power will not accept anybody that doesn't accept the legitimacy of the regime. That's how you oppress people, right? That's what an oppression is. And so it's all about taxes, not paying your taxes, the legitimacy of the regime, constitutional, the government exceeding its constitutional authority. They're going to use taxes. That document is being created and worked upon as a mechanism to go after people for avoiding taxes, which is a Russiagate. It means that you're basically exposing every single American to the unlimited resources of the government, and every single American will now have to confront Russiagate, except as
but on you.
Yeah, Russiagate on you via taxes or whatever else they can get. But taxes is the most convenient, right? Because everybody has to pay their taxes. There's always failure in tax payments and remittance, right? There's always going to be failure if you're.
Yeah, everybody does their taxes, get something wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So so just going back to that, so I don't think that Antifa is necessarily just looking to drive white supremacists out. I think they can be activated so that they're now trying to hunt down extreme patriots, which could be black people as well. Because if you listen to their language, we've seen that happen many times where you have the African American Trump supporter and Antifa is screaming the most racist
ethnic slurs you could think of, stuff that would get you banned immediately on Twitter if any of us said it, right? And they're screaming it at these people, or in some cases, black police officers, black military members. The same type of racial abuse is being hurled at them. This from an organization, of course, that purports itself to be anti-racist.
So I don't think they would be going after white supremacists, because white supremacists are guilty. So they would be, if you're a white supremacist,
going after anyone who doesn't support the revolution.
Yeah. Now I'm going to show you the clip, and then we're going to go. So
okay.
I'm
holding you to that.
I'm promising you, man. I'm promising. But look, I'm going to get your book up here. I really do want everybody, and I don't mean to be solicitous, even though I really do. But I do want everybody.
You do. I want you to be.
I think it's
my
important.
Publishers definitely want you to be.
And I'm going to continually remind everybody, and I should have been more persistent within this thing, so I apologize. But I do want everybody to buy your book. I think it's important, and I think it's also kind of a way that people can support the cause. I've looked through academic papers, right, because I was so curious about Antifa. And let me tell you, there are very few, virtually no academic papers, you probably know this better than I do, about American Antifa.
I mean, there was maybe one I could find that when I was conducting research for this. There are a few actually out of Turkey focusing on the phenomenon of Antifa members traveling to Northeast Syria to work with the militants there. But in terms of U.S. papers, no, absolutely not. I
looked everywhere, and all of the papers have to have the usual Trump is a fascist, racist, and there's justification. It's ridiculous. And I think your book, one of the reasons I was so eagerly, hoping for your book was not just because of the infiltration, which is operational, because I'm a business guy. I'm really interested in the operations and infrastructure of things, but also how they're getting recruiting, and the messaging that they're using is so interesting. And the book really does a great job with that. So I think it's important because it will show people that there's an industry for actual reporting. You know that? That's very important. There has to be an industry for this. Not everything can be. Amanda Milius, who's such a wonderful person, did Plot for the President, which is a very big, broad subject. I mean, the plot against the president, right? Very big, broad subject.
I'm in it.
That's right. I got the clip here too. But it's a very big, popular subject that everybody can engage in, right? Antifa brings up a lot of emotional issues that people really don't want to engage in because there's so much violence in it. The nucleus of the organization is violence.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to show you the clip, then we're going to go watch.
On or before January 20th, Donald Trump will no longer be the commander-in-chief. He will lose control of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Special Forces, and America's nuclear arsenal. On January 20th, Donald Trump will become the commander-in-chief of a different army. This army. The greatest threat facing America today comes from within. Radical extreme conservatives, also known as domestic terrorists. They are hidden among us, disguised behind regular jobs. They are your children's teachers. They work at supermarkets, malls, doctors' offices, and many are police officers and soldiers. For more than a decade, Donald Trump has spoken directly to white supremacists in their language.
Build that wall! Build that wall! Build that wall!
Pocahontas? Is it offensive? Oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
In the middle of a presidential debate, Donald Trump was asked to disavow white supremacy. He refused. Instead, he told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
They heard their leader. They even responded to him on Twitter, promising to stand by. And on January 6, 2021, Trump greenlit them. They suited up, they flew in, they took hotel rooms, they loaded their weapons, prepared their bombs, and they attacked with the intention of killing Nancy Pelosi and hanging Vice President Mike Pence.
They were vocally saying, "Where's the speaker? We know she has staff. They're here someplace. We're going to find them."
In the years ahead, Trump will lead his army of domestic terrorists. He will encourage and incite violence. He will play the role of arsonist and fireman. He will start a civil war and then say things were more peaceful when he was president. We have to fight back. In this new war, the battlefield has changes. Computers can be more valuable than guns. And this is what we need now more than ever, an army of citizen detectives. I'm proposing we form a citizen army. Our weapons will be computers and cell phones. We who are monitoring extremists on the internet and reporting their findings to authorities. Remember, before the Navy SEALs killed Osama bin Laden, he had to be found. He was found by a CIA analyst working on a computer thousands of miles away. It's up to you.
Dude, that's crazy.
It's actually not how they found bin Laden, but I'm not allowed to talk about that too much.
Okay, but still, that's crazy. If you don't
Yeah,
think
so
that's
what you're seeing here is this is a equivalent to 2 Minutes Hate by Emmanuel Goldstein by IngSoc in 1984. Right, this is a video whereby anybody who watches it that has been sucked in by it is instructed quite literally to target, demonize, persecute, and participate in the killing of anyone who is a conservative, a Trump supporter, a patriotic, loving American, right? That is the subtext of the video that everyone has just been seeing. And that it is a direct call to violence. It is a direct call to murder. You can hear that in the end, right? We need to send the Navy SEALs to kill them, right? They're using the phraseology of murder. You're using a lot of neurolinguistic programming throughout the entire thing, repeating the word army, army, army over and over throughout this thing. This is a call to militarization in a sense that I absolutely agree with you that this is something that is definitely putting out a call to radicalize and to form groups like Antifa.
Well, I'm going to show you 5 seconds of something. 5 seconds. Watch this. I'm just going to go through them really quickly. Watch this. First, you punch a Nazi thing. Again, watch.
Punch a Nazi in the face.
Okay, you saw that. I told you.
Right.
Now watch this. This is about hunting Nazis.
Do I think that we need a moment of considering how we're going to deal with this threat that looks like it's going to be with us for a while? Yeah, I think you almost need a 9/11 commission kind of activity. It's got to be a combination of FBI. It has to include DHS. And you've got to find a way to bring intelligence or the craft of intelligence into it. And I don't think that's in one organization right now. As an old intelligence.
And then the last one is this one.
On the call,
John
I was thinking
Brennan.
today that this is the most relaxed I've been in the course of many inaugurations I've watched because I'm not responsible for it. But I can tell you that when I was in the government, I had white knuckles because of the nature of the threats. But it's so much more difficult today because of what we have seen, not just over the last 2 weeks, but that certainly has riveted our attention, but because of this growth in polarization in the United States.
And the last one is this one. This is John McCain's daughter, that's his daughter, right? Who's saying that Americans should go to Guantanamo, where you were, right? You were in Guantanamo. Was that
one year? Yeah, about 1 year there.
Americans should obviously never
side of the desk, not the other side.
Understood. Americans should never be in Guantanamo. There's a very legitimate argument that Guantanamo should be closed up because it has very little oversight. And visibility into people, so people can see the conditions of it.
Well, there's a massive amount of oversight in Guantanamo. I don't particularly have any feelings about whether or not the facility itself should be closed, but there's people that should be kept behind bars, 100%.
But so John McCain's daughter is telling people, that Americans, should be eligible. She wouldn't mind if Americans went there. Yeah. That's a signal. But that's a signal to Antifa because they're already a very emotionally weak people. So if you're
right, so the NLP there is that these are terrorists. We're talking about domestic terrorists. We're talking about threats. So you're going for that primal fear in interrogation or human intelligence. You refer to this as emotional fear up, right? So emotional fear up approach.
So when I listen to it, I think that the media. I don't know if you follow Rukmini Callimachi, if you ever read her stuff from the New York Times. She talks about ISIS and how they use videos to recruit and stuff like that. She's been
this is very similar to an ISIS video. Many of these are.
That's exactly what I thought. These are like ISIS videos where they're trying to recruit emotionally vulnerable people,
right?
And then almost like into a cult, right? You're trying to find emotionally weak people, emotionally vulnerable people, have them identify with something, give them a reward system for it, give them some type of an apprenticeship implicitly within that type of thing, and a family within the type of thing. Those are, to me, they're recruiting extremists. And Antifa are extremist.
Yes, absolutely.
That's it. I said my thing, man. Dude, we did it.
We did it.